Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mpact Limited's results presentation for the 6 months ended 30 June 2025. Taking you through the presentation this morning is Bruce Strong, CEO, and Hannes Snyman, CFO. Should you have any questions, please make use of the question tab at the bottom of your control panel. And may I suggest that you type your questions throughout the presentation. I will then post your questions to Bruce and Hannes at the conclusion of the presentation. I now hand you over to Bruce.
Thank you, Marlies. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this 2025 interim results presentation. As Marlies mentioned, Hannes will join me to take you through the results, after which we'll happily take any questions that you have. Today we're also joined by our chairman, Sibulu Tuli, who's in person here with us in the boardroom, and a number of our other board members and exco members who are also joining us online. So welcome to you, Sibulu. Thank you for joining us, and to all the other colleagues as well. Reflecting back to March when we last met, we were somewhat more optimistic about what the economy might do than what actually turned out. And as it turned out, the challenging trading conditions continued with the really weak consumer spending in South Africa. I think most of you have seen that in many of the statistics that have come through in the recent past. And of course, that was also the case in a global context where the containerboard and cartonboard sectors in the global paper industry have seen quite a prolonged downturn, which has affected margins and demand to some extent. So we faced a subdued economy despite lower interest rates and moderating inflation, while the uncertainty has been there for all of us. Despite this, we were grateful to see good volume growth in our containerboard business, specifically from Felixstowe and Mkhondo paper mills, and also in fruit packaging, which many of you will recall has been a strategic focus area of our business over the past couple of years, focusing on growth sectors with higher margins, and that came through in this period. But that was more than offset by lower volumes in the industrial focus sectors, and also margin pressure across most of the businesses. We have continued to make good progress on our strategic projects and also our portfolio optimization. You'll recall that at the end of last year, we sold off our Mpact business, and that has been fully dealt with now, with the proceeds fully recognized. And also the portfolio optimization in our FMCG Wadeville business has also concluded with the reduction in the production of toll manufactured preforms, and that's reflected in the numbers now. That was not a surprise, it was anticipated. But all of that was exacerbated, I suppose, by, or let's call it the decline in volumes from Wadeville, faced the general economy, which was weaker on industrial sales. I have to say that since the beginning of June and late May, there have been some signs of increased activity reflected in orders across most of our businesses. And our recycling collections in Mpact Recycling of recovered paper, often considered a leading indicator of consumption, have also increased notably since the beginning of May. So maybe that does demonstrate that we could expect a little bit of an uptick in the next period. But for planning purposes and the way we're running our businesses, we are still maintaining quite strong pressure on the costs, not sort of letting things get away until we see the actual volumes come through. As I mentioned, we have seen sustained pressure in the paper business in terms of margins, and I'm sure most of you who follow the paper industry will agree that the current down cycle in the containerboard and cartonboard sector globally has been relatively long and deep, with very low margins reported across many of the businesses that are reported recently, as selling prices dropped earlier and more than input costs during this cycle, especially in recycled-based containerboard and cartonboard. And a quote that came from RMB Morgan Stanley in May is quite noteworthy, where they said, "Our generic testliner producer margin is skinny," the word they used, and they estimated that EBITDA margins of a generic testliner producer would be around 1%, taking OCC and gas prices at spot. So it demonstrates the pressure that the market has been under, and they didn't anticipate that changing in the near term. In that context, I must say we are actually quite pleased to see the profitability of our Felixstowe mill in the first instance in a down cycle, still doing very well in terms of profitability and able to place its paper even at these prices, both locally and in export markets. So I think the cyclical downturn aside, and the impact that it's had on containerboard, we've managed to hold our own there. Where we have struggled is in our cartonboard business, specifically our Springs mill, where we have been fully exposed to the lower selling prices for imported alternatives, and also demand which has been down, not only because of import competition, but also generally the market for those products being down. In that context, it was important that we controlled our costs, and those have been well controlled during the period. Our fixed costs are up less than inflation at 1.9%, and we've curtailed non-essential capital expenditure for most of the first half to manage the cash flow and also just the general state of the business under the circumstances. The 1.3 billion rand Mkhondo mill upgrade has progressed well, and I'll cover that in the next slides just now, which has got a lot of detail there. And our NAV per share compared to last year's up 5% to 35.85, which I think is encouraging. Mpact Operations, our main trading entity, maintained its level 1 BEE status during the period, which is important for the markets in which we trade. Moving on now to the Mkhondo mill upgrade project. Firstly, I'm going to show you a short video to demonstrate some of the progress that's been made, and then I'll go through some of the details of the project and the progress that we're making there.
The upgrade and expansion project at the Mkhondo paper mill is set to reposition the mill as a predominantly virgin fibre operation with a more flexible and enhanced product range.
The crux of the project is to increase the pulping capacity of the mill. We're going to increase the virgin fibre capacity by 58,000 tonnes and the machine capacity by 10,000 tonnes. We've installed the turbo vacuum pumps which replace the old liquid ring technology, and that brings through quite a lot of energy savings.
The new chipping line is fully operational, surpassing the guaranteed throughput rates and setting a new benchmark for efficiency and productivity. In addition, a spray dryer has been installed to beneficiate the additional black liquor generated by the increased wood pulping.
The beneficiation of the byproduct then from that pulping stream is the black liquor into sodium lignosulfonate, and that is a very important economic driver for this project and for the future of the actual mill. The SLS plant brings in roughly about 800 cubic meters of liquid per day and processes that into sodium lignosulfonate powder, which is bagged, containerized and sold into the export market.
Following the successful production of the first powder earlier this year, the plant has achieved its instantaneous production rate. Software and loop tuning is now underway to ensure long-term operational stability. Looking ahead, preparation for the pulp mill upgrade is progressing well.
There's a real sense of anticipation for the next phase, which effectively will set this mill up for the next 40 to 50 years.
The Mkhondo mill upgrade is more than an infrastructure project. It's a future-focused investment in efficiency, innovation, and sustainability.
And every time I feel so grateful for the dedicated and highly skilled team we have there, working together under the leadership of Brian, who you saw on the video, and Harvey Kutsia, the mill manager there. And in a project of this nature, many of you may know that it requires such good cooperation between the mill team and the project team, both of whom are full-time Mpact employees. And they've done so admirably in the past year to make sure that even through the most difficult times, we're able to develop a really sustainable future for this business, despite many challenges. I mentioned some of the challenges early in the year. More recently, we've had the typical stuff you find with construction projects from community forums and people like that. And the team have really managed those in a very effective way and honorable way. And I also feel very encouraged by the energy and commitment of the teams we have there. And the caliber, especially of our younger colleagues who have stepped up admirably during this project. And, you know, as the project's tailing off to the end now, some of them have been appointed to new roles and have shown great energy and foresight in the way they've taken on their responsibility. And I think we can be very encouraged by the team we have, not only at Mkhondo, but across our business, to take our business forward for many years to come. And We're also devastated by the sudden passing last week of one of our dear colleagues, John Reed, who passed away suddenly in an unrelated, it wasn't a work-related incident. You know, I've known John for more than 25 years personally. He's a stalwart of our industry, working in Mondimia Bank for many years. And over the last few years in our Mkondo mill as one of the key project managers there, one of Brian's right-hand men, and our condolences go out to his family and colleagues. He was a key member of our team, and he'll be sorely missed going forward. Just looking at the project progress, the SLS spray dryer has been commissioned. It was commissioned earlier in the year, and we've produced a fair amount of SLS since then. Some of that's gone out to the market for testing. Some of it's been slush to use for dust suppressant on roads, not because we didn't have a market for it, but because we also have to keep that market running. And importantly, the SLS that we want to really test in the market is the SLS that will be generated from the new pulp mill, or the upgraded pulp mill, which will start up during the course of this month. And so once that is started up and we have got the new sort of quality black liquor, which will be much improved, we'll be sending that to the market for further testing. But the SLS plant has shown its capability to run at capacity. And once we are able to do the tests, I think we'll be in a good position to realize the benefits from that project. You can see the plant in that picture there. Actually, the biggest vessel there on the top left is the spray dryer itself. That's where you spray the liquor into. You've got hot air coming up that is generated in a hot air generator. And that hot air then evaporates off the liquid, leaving you with a dry powder that is decanted from or taken out from the bottom. The hot air generator is the structure on the right, the far right, top corner. There's a conveyor going up there with some wood chips on, and it's fed with biomass, but it can also be fed with coal. And that is used to generate hot air, which is then going into the spray dryer to evaporate off the liquor. Prior to feeding into the hot air generator, into the spray dryer, we evaporate and thicken up the black liquor in the evaporator, which is in the foreground, that tall vessel in the foreground there, and that's fed with steam. So it gives you some sense of the scale of the plant, and I'm sure you would have got that also from Brian standing there. So that video that you saw was more around the SLS plant. It's a substantial plant and a very well constructed plant, and I remain very optimistic about its prospects in the future. Other items that have been completed already are the new chipping line. You would have seen the chipping line in the video as well. We're now chipping also 6-meter logs, and it's surpassed by quite a margin its design specifications. So we're able to reduce the number of shifts that we're running there to chip the wood that we get in, mainly eucalyptus timber. And the turbo vacuum pumps, which are a key part of the energy savings on the paper machine, have been commissioned, and they're working well and within specifications and contributing already to significant savings in electricity costs in the paper mill. The paper mill shut was completed in July successfully and within the time frame allocated to its work. That is now up and running again, although we are not running our full mix of products because we don't have the full amount of pulp that we require at this stage. And that will be available once the pulp mill starts up during the course of August. And the pulp mill construction, for most practical purposes, is just about complete. And the shut is due to be completed during the course of the next couple of weeks, following which we'll start up the pulp mill and get it optimized, including feeding the black liquor to the SLS plant, so we can test that in the market as well. So the final completion of the main productive elements in terms of construction and commissioning will be by the end of September this year. The original date was the end of June 2025, and that was committed in around early 2022. So in other words, 3.5 years ago. So I must say, I think for a project that's been running 3 years to be 3 months later than originally scheduled is still very commendable, and we can be grateful for the team we have on that project who have delivered that despite the many headwinds. The outstanding part of the project is not really the productive part of the plant that makes the money. It's the waste management infrastructure for both water and solid waste. And that was originally planned to be completed by the end of 2028. But our latest estimate is we'll have it completed during the course of 2027. And that is just because the way things have worked out, it would be good for us to do that because we think we can save quite a lot of operating costs by completing that project earlier. The biggest bottleneck currently is getting the environmental approvals, just routine. There's nothing peculiar about it, but it does take quite long to get through the various approval processes. You'll see that cash flow forecasting in the number and the planned cash flow. Well, that's, I would say, planned and forecasted. The original plan has changed somewhat from what you see here. You'll see this year we've got 402 million forecast to be spent, 107 million next year and 47 million the year after. Those last two values relate to the waste management infrastructure upgrades. So in summary, the project due to be completed by the end of the third quarter this year. The costs up slightly on the number that we shared with you in March at 1.33 billion. So that's 30 million over that, which is 2.2% over the last reported number. And most of the costs have been committed for the main project. The balance of that 82% you can see on screen, that 18% is basically the 150 or 160 odd million for the environmental upgrades, and also the final payments and the retention payments for the main project. I'm also pleased to let you know that the project returns are still very attractive, and we still remain very optimistic about the prospects. I should also just point out that the pulp mill benefits of the increased pulp production, those will also flow through as the demand for increased fruit boxes increases over the next 3 or 4 years. You'll see the latest numbers of Citrus Growers Association being positive on last year, and we're still looking at the project 2060 or 260 million cartons by the end of 2030 odd. I think that's been moderated down slightly, but our numbers are still very robust in that context. So that benefit will come through over time. The SLS benefit should come through a bit earlier than that, but certainly not this year. We don't expect it this year. It'll be starting more from next year. So all in all, we're very optimistic about the prospects of this project and the progress that's been made. Moving on now to our renewable energy projects and the status there. Many of you would have seen this slide in one form or another before. So we've updated the numbers just so you can get a sense of where they are. So to date, we've got a total installed capacity for solar PV of 16 megawatts already in operation. We've got 1.8 megawatts still under construction, and that's part of our Nelspruit operation in Mbombela in Mpumalanga, and also in Springsmill. You might recall that we put in 4 or 5 odd megawatts in Springsmill ground mounted a couple of years ago. We're now putting in just over a megawatt of carports in Springsmill. We had some extra panels, and so we supplemented that with some additional panels that we imported to add another megawatt there, which is all behind the meter, so a great payback on that. And then we've got another 4 megawatts that's been approved and currently being procured, and that's from Kondo and one other location, Walvis Bay, and that will be installed in the next 6 to 12 months, which is also very encouraging. And that brings us to a total of 21.8 megawatts by this time next year, compared to our target by the end of 2027 of 25 megawatts. So that leaves a short 3.2, and we believe that we will be able to find that that capacity and the need for that capacity in several of our operations. So we're confident that we'll reach the 25 megawatts by that time. It's worth noting that the 218 million rand that we've invested in these solar projects is all on the group's balance sheet. We haven't had any fancy structures to fund it, so it's all on the balance sheet, and that's encouraging. And we're also looking, I mentioned before, at this 66 megawatt installation that could be put in the Mkondo area, right next to our paper mill, because we own quite a big piece of land there. We've already got notification from the Eskom colleagues there that they can take the power into the substation that is adjacent to that site. We believe that the behind the meter quantity that we could put in there, which amounts to about 18 if we take ourselves, but if we include our neighbors, over 30 megawatts, that would make complete financial sense to do that. But the other balance of, say, 30 or 35 megawatts, it's not obvious that the economic returns are there for selling solar power going forward. And so, Hannes and the team there have been really working on the financial modeling to understand the prospects there and whether that makes sense. rands and cents, that is. Once we've proven that, then we'll make a decision and we'll take to our board that project. But I think there is definitely potential for a number, at least 20 megawatts that might come out there. And that will be done in time. If we were to do the bigger project, it would certainly not necessarily be on our own balance sheet. So you don't need to panic about that. It's worth noting also that we saved 20 million rand in electricity costs more than 20 million in the first half of the year, which is very encouraging. In terms of green energy that we buy wheeled from others to Mpact, we have a contract in place for 25.7 gigawatt hours of gas generated energy that's been in place for some time, and that's in northern KwaZulu-Natal from our neighbor there. And then we've signed up for another 30 gigawatt hours per annum of solar generated green energy that will be wheeled to us, and that will start around September 2026. And the main reason there, besides the carbon savings that we can then bank and reflect, is the cost saving, because it does make sense from a financial point of view to wheel where it's available. Moving on now to the financial review, and I'm going to start with the group numbers. So group revenue was up 3.2% to 6.4 billion rand for the period, and that was underpinned by a 1.5% increase in volumes and a 1.7% increase in the average price, which was based basically on sales mix. But because of the nature of the two businesses being quite different, it's better to explain all the details when we get to the divisional or the segmental reports, and I'll do that. The volume growth is underpinned by good growth in containerboard, where we're up more than 20% in the year, citrus cartons, which were up nicely, and jumbo bins and agricultural crates in our bins and crates business. So demonstrating that the benefits from the increased investments into the fruit sector are paying off. Those gains were offset by declines in our FMCG Wadeville, which were anticipated, as I mentioned, as part of that portfolio optimization. Declines in cartonboard, which we didn't anticipate to the extent that it came about, and also industrial cartons, which was linked to the general decline in the consumer economy in South Africa. In terms of the gross profit, our gross profit of 2.4 billion rand declined by 2.8%, which works out to about 70 million rand. And that's due to the under-recovery of higher input costs, most notably in the paper business, and lower sales volumes in our plastics business. The gross margin of 38% was down 2.3 percentage points from a year earlier. All of that translated to EBITDA declining to 625 million rand, which is 14% down, or 106 million rand. And that's mainly due to the lower gross profit and higher fixed costs, which escalated by 1.9%, or 37 million rand. Underlying operating profit of 15 million rand was due to the lower gross profit, as I mentioned earlier. Headline earnings per share were 93 cents. Return on capital employed was 9.3%, and gearing improved to 33.7% from 36.9% last year. And we have the board has declared an interim dividend of 30 cents per share for the period, which is the same as last year. And Hannes will go through in more detail. He'll go through all of those numbers for you. Moving on now to the segmental reports, and I'll start with the paper business. Paper business revenue increased 7% to 5.4 billion rand, and that was underpinned by volume growth of 6% and average selling prices increasing by about 1%. The growth in sales was underpinned by the containerboard business, both Mkhondo and Felixton being up on last year through both domestic sales and export sales. And the numbers that I share here are total sales, and the reason why I do that is because in a paper mill you need to look at the contribution to the overall utilization of your paper machine, whereas when we report externally, we report external sales. But that doesn't really help you understand. So our total sales of containerboard were up 20% compared to last year due to higher sales in the domestic market and our export sales going up nearly 50% compared to last year at the same time. And this was offset by declines in cartonboard and industrial cartons, as I mentioned earlier. I should just mention that recycling volumes were down slightly on the prior year. And I won't talk a lot about recycling. The only time I mention recycling in these presentations is where the business has a bearing on the rest of understanding the rest of the numbers. In this case, because the variances are so small, I won't talk much about recycling because they don't have a bearing on the numbers, both the profits or the turnover, other than the cost for recyclable paper that we purchased, which Hannes will cover in more detail, and I'll touch on also shortly. In terms of agricultural sector, the carton sales were up, with citrus up very nicely on last year. Stone fruit was also up. It was offset to some extent by avocados, which were down due to smaller fruit sizes and lower selling prices in export markets, which saw some of our producers delaying their harvesting. The decline in the corrugated business in Avos was offset by an increase in our crates business, where we saw quite a big increase in the purchase by our customers of plastic crates, the foldable plastic crates that are used for exporting Avos. So they saw a big uptick in that area. Bananas were also down due to some payment issues from Mozambique, and also we lost a bit of market share in the eastern part of the country towards the end of last year, which we've since regained. And tomatoes were down despite volumes being up because of late season rain. So it was a bit of a mixed bag in the agri sector, but we still anticipate a very strong finish to the year in the agri sector. In terms of the average selling prices, our average selling price is up 1%, but that's mainly due to the mix. I mean, our containerboard prices are in line with prior year. Our cartonboard prices are up 4% on prior year, but that's mainly mix in that business. And paper converting is also up just short of 3% on prior year, despite the market being down. And that's mainly the mix, because you've got higher agri sales and lower industrial sales. I'll just mention, although the volumes are small and the overall quantums are relatively small in the context of the overall paper business, Jetpack's volumes were up 1.6%, which is pretty good in this market, and their pricing was down slightly. The gross profit in the paper business was in line with the prior period at just over 2 billion rand, with the gross margin declining by 2.7 percentage points for the reasons that Hannes will cover later. And mainly the higher OCC prices, which offset the benefits of increased volumes. OCC prices were up 18%, which is quite significant. And energy costs were up 10% due to increased production and also higher Eskom prices for purchase power. Hannes will cover the OCC and energy cost related matters a little later. Underlying operating profit in the paper business was 346 million rand, with the fixed costs up slightly higher than inflation numbers or CPI numbers at 3.7%. And that's mainly due to last year we had 26 days of commercial downtime in both containerboard mills compared to none this year. So we had higher staff costs this year because we didn't have the leave provisions. People were on leave last year, whereas this year they were working, and also higher bonus provisions because they've actually produced very well. For example, Felixton has produced, I think, what must be record numbers in the 6 months. And then in Mkhondo, we also had some upgrade project related operating costs, which are normal for a project of this nature. Otherwise, the costs were well contained in the paper business as they were in the plastics business. It's not on the slide, but I'll just mention that external utility supply interruptions remain a challenge, particularly at our Springs paper mill, where we had 18 days of downtime this year for both water and power. Mkhondo and Felixton mill had negligible, or just 1 day each, which is not a lot in aggregate. And commercial downtime at Springs, we took 15 days in the period due to the weaker demand and the competition from imports. Moving on now to the plastics business. In the plastics business, our revenue declined just short of 15% to 936 million rand. And that was underpinned solely by a 47% decline in volumes, due primarily to the portfolio optimization at FMCG Wadeville, which I've spoken about before and I'll cover just now, and also a decline in bottling crates, which was greater than 50%, and I'll cover that shortly. It's worth just mentioning when it comes to bottle crates that they have always been cyclical. The demand for bottle crates has always been cyclical, not just in the year, but over the years, because these crates are capital items in the hands of our customers, the big brewers, and also the beverage companies, the other beverage companies. And so, you know, from year to year, they change their capital allocation. And as a consequence, the sales can vary quite dramatically. And that's one of the reasons why we avoided this sector for many years. And another reason why we've said to ourselves, we don't want to have our exposure to the bottling sector to be more than 30% of our revenue. And we even have less reliance when it comes to gross profit contribution. So while it's down a lot, the lost contribution or gross profit as a consequence of that isn't as substantial as you might imagine. Notwithstanding that cyclicality, we still make good returns from this business through the cycle, especially given our low cost and flexible manufacturing capabilities. And there I should just mention, for example, that the machines that produce the beverage crates also produce the Avo crates and the berry crates, you know, the foldable crates that are used in those sectors, and a number of other crates used across various sectors. And so those machines aren't standing idle in these times, and we're able to make good productive use of them. And so while you'll see the numbers vary quite a bit, I think it's worth just mentioning that it's still a good sector to be in. Other challenges that were faced by the business that affected volumes were the vinegar shortages, some of you may have read about in some of the other listed company presentations, that affected mayonnaise jar and closure sales. Those are made mainly in our Wadeville factory. Those have since started to recover, but did have quite a big impact in the first half because we are quite a significant producer of those jars out of PET in the South African market. All of those declines were offset by good growth in other crates in our business. So in the agricultural crates, we are very nicely for both jumbo bins, Avo crates, berry crates, and many of the other crates. And also in other sectors of the crates business, we are up other than bottling, which is very encouraging. And then the rest of our fast-moving consumer goods plastics business, where we produce home care, personal care products, and other food packaging, they were up just over 5%, which is very encouraging in a tough market. I must say they've aligned with customers, have shown great resilience, and have implemented a number of new projects across their product lines, which are bearing fruit because that growth was also very profitable growth, which is encouraging to see. In terms of gross profit, the gross profit in absolute terms in the plastics business declined by nearly 14%, just short of 14%, which was 66 million rand. And that was due primarily to lower sales volumes. The gross margin increased marginally to 43.2%. And you may recall, for those who have followed us, that in the plastics business, when the polymer prices start coming off, the margins expand slightly, and when they go up, our margins contract slightly. And we've been in a period where polymer prices have come off in the recent past. So we've passed those benefits on to customers, but there's typically a bit of a delay in that in the nature of our contracts. So that's why the margins has expanded somewhat. And also coupled with that, the mix change, which I think is positive. The underlying operating profit in the plastics business was 7 million rand. But I think the key thing to remember here is that the plastics business typically makes just about all of its profit in the second half of the year. And we expect this year to be no different. In fact, our plastic containers business, we're still expecting quite good growth and profitability for the full year compared to last year. The same in FMCG Wadeville, and the same in FMCG, the other FMCG businesses, Town and Atlantis. So we do expect a full year improvement on last year when we get to the end of the year this year, notwithstanding the current position. I think it's worth mentioning that the fixed costs were down 4.5%, which demonstrates that they've been well managed in the period in the plastics business. I'm now going to hand you over to Hannes, who will take you through some more of the costs and also the debt and so on, following which I'll come and share with you the outlook for the rest of the period. Over to you, Hannes.
Thanks, Bruce. Before we get into all the details of this slide, I just want to spend some time on the gross profit and gross profit margins by division. I think that will assist with explaining some of the impact of the variable costs on the overall results. So for the paper business, the absolute gross profit in rands was in line with the prior period, but the margin percentage was lower by about 2.7 percentage points. That is because the increase in sales volumes and revenue was offset by higher variable costs, driven primarily by higher OCC prices and energy costs. In the plastics business, the absolute gross profit in rands was lower by about 14% due to lower sales volumes and revenue, but the margin improved slightly due to a favorable change in mix and lower polymer prices. So overall, the group's absolute gross profit in rands was down by about 2.8%, which is roughly 70 million rand, with the margin percentage decreasing by approximately 2.3 percentage points. Paper raw material costs were up by 6.3% on the previous period, and that's due to an increase in sales volumes, higher recovered paper prices, and also an increase in external paper prices. So as Bruce mentioned, we had a bit of a change in mix where we purchased more for the agri customers, and those volumes, most of that we procure externally. This was somewhat offset by lower costs incurred for pulp and wood, and the lower cost for pulp did come at the expense of higher working capital, which I'll touch on later. OCC pricing in the first half was up about 18% on average when compared to the first half of 2024. And that was driven by increased demand, and especially export demand from India. As you can see from the OCC benchmark slide or graph there on the slide, international prices have come off according to RISI, but South African export prices for OCC has actually increased by about 20% if you compare the two half periods. And this is based on data that we get from SARS. OCC prices for June and July so far this year has been stable, but it is about 10% higher than the average price that we paid in the second half of 2024. We do think OCC prices may start to come down, as most of the local mills are quite well stocked, and we have seen export volumes and prices starting to come off some of the previous highs. However, the impact of the new tariffs on OCC pricing is still uncertain. Although the plastics revenue is down by about 14%, the plastics raw material purchases decreased by 2%. However, if you exclude the purchase of recovered paper, of recovered plastics, so that's the PET bottles that we recover in the recycling business, polymer purchase costs are down by about 11%. And that's due to lower sales volumes, as well as a change in product mix due to the decline of hardtail sales at FMCG Wayville. So for hardtail sales, basically the customer buys the raw material. So the raw material doesn't come into your cost of sales. And because that's reduced, it doesn't actually impact your cost of sales line that much. And we've also seen, as Bruce mentioned, a decrease in prices for most of our polymer grades, which you can see on the slide. Energy costs increased by 4%. Sorry, still a previous one. Increased by 4%. And we saw regulated price increases of about 12 to 13% in 2025. And we also had an increase in production of paper manufacturing business, which was offset by a 22% decrease in plastics energy costs, mostly due to lower production at FMCG Wayville, as well as the benefits from our solar investments. Variable selling and distribution costs were high in the paper business due to increased transport costs associated with moving OCC from the Eastern and Western Cape to our containerboard mills due to high demand. And just for context, the transport cost for moving baled OCC from the Western Cape to Felixton is almost twice as expensive as transporting the same volume from Gauteng. We also experienced higher exports in our paper manufacturing business, where containerboard export volumes increased by approximately 46% year on year, and those sales do attract a higher variable cost. The total fixed cost was up by 1.9%, and if you exclude depreciation and amortization, it's up by about 2.1%. And personnel costs increased by 3%, mostly due to less downtime at the paper mills. So although personnel costs are largely fixed, it does contain variable elements such as overtime, production bonuses, as well as less short time and leave pay movements. Net operating expenses increased by 2% if you exclude an unfavorable forex movement of approximately 20 million in the current period. So in this half, we had a forex loss of 14 million, and we had a forex gain in the previous half, about 6 million. which comes to the 20 million adverse effect. Maintenance costs decreased by 8%, and maintenance costs have been quite high for the last couple of years due to the various ongoing projects, but they're starting to moderate to more normal levels. So historically, our maintenance has been about 4 to 4.5% of revenue, compared to 5%, which was spent in 2023 and 2024. Depreciation and amortization increased by just under 1%. No major projects were capitalized in the first half of 2025, other than for the automated warehouse at bins and crates. However, this cost will most likely increase in the second half of 2025 when we start to capitalize the different sections of the Macondo upgrade project. And we expect about an additional 15 to 20 million rand of depreciation in paper manufacturing if we capitalize as projected in Q3 this year. On the prior year numbers here, it's just worth noting, so similar to our 2024 year-end results, the tax charge for continued and discontinued operations was restated for the first half of 2024 to disclose VersaPack on an after-tax basis. The restatement did not affect the overall tax charge for total operations. The effective tax rate for this half was 26.8%, which is in line with the statutory rate. You may recall at the end of 2024, there was about 150 million rand of unrecognized tax losses remaining, which is associated with our bins and crates business, which is after 27%, it's about 40 million rand. None of this was recognized in the half, and similar to prior periods, it will be evaluated at the end of this year in terms of how we recognize. We also expect a significant wear and tear allowance in the second half of 2025 due to the anticipated partial capitalization of the Macondo project. Other items to note include earnings from equity accounted investments. This decreased due to margin pressure at some of the associates, and which is somewhat offset by higher profitability at Africa Tanks. The decrease in non-controlling interests is as a result of lower profitability in our bins and crates business, of which Mpact owns 66%. And profit from discontinued operations in the prior period is about 24 million, and that relates to the VersaPack business that was sold in November 2024. Our net debt ended up at 2.98 billion, which is lower than the prior period, but higher than the 2.37 billion as is the end of December 2024. This is due to the cyclical nature of our business, where working capital is usually higher at this time of the year, and we expect our working capital and net debt to reduce by the end of the year. Finance costs are lower than the prior period due to lower interest rates, as well as 36 million of interest costs capitalized at the Macondo Mill project in the first half of 2025. This was about 19 million in the first half of 2024. So if you look at net finance costs in the cash flow statement, it is lower by about 5%, and that's mostly due to lower interest rates. The average net debt was in line with the prior period, and that was due to low profitability and also higher working capital in the paper manufacturing business, especially during the first 4 months of the year. So I mentioned earlier that there were some pricing advantages of pulp, but we had to buy that pulp in advance, which meant we carried the pulp in the first half of the year. And we've also imported starch to take advantage of more favorable pricing. We had high finished goods at Springs due to weak demand, and also just overall high working capital in our containerboard business due to less downtime. As at the end of June, the group had access to about 4.7 billion of committed facilities, and the headroom on our gross bank debt, if you exclude the cash, was about 1.2 billion rand. We have kicked off our refinance, and we are in the process of finalizing legal agreements, and we anticipate that our new debt package will be in place by the end of Q3 2025. The first upcoming maturity of our existing debt is only in August 2026, so we do have ample time. This is just a snapshot of the movements in our net debt if you compare December 24 to June 2025. And you can see that cash generated from operations was 635 million, and that was offset by working capital outflows, as well as about 400 million spent on capex, of which roughly 280 million relates to the Macondo Mill project, And there is the net interest cost of 165, which is the interest cost on all of our borrowings, and it doesn't include the capitalization. Our working capital overall improved if you compare it to the first half of 2024, and that's largely due to a reduction in trade receivables in the paper business, as well as realizing the Mpact working capital. So we still had in our numbers in the historical periods, there was about 67 million of working capital related to Mpact in the June numbers for 24, and there was just under 100 million as at the end of December 2024. And the bulk of that was collected during May 2025. And as we sit here today, there's not much outstanding, and most of that benefit has now been realized. When you compare the first half of 2025 though to 2024, you'll note an increase in stock and debtors, which is a seasonal increase due to the business producing products for customers for their peak demand in the second half of the year. And for example, we will start producing and even selling in certain instances before the packaging is actually required to manage capacity constraints through the entire value chain. ROCE for continued operations decreased to 9.3% in the first half of this year due to the large capital outlays for projects as well as lower profitability. It is worth noting that if you exclude the capital work, which is the capital work in progress, so it's basically money that we've spent but we haven't capitalized yet and we're not earning any return on it. It was about 1.3 billion as at the end of June 2025. And if you exclude that, the ROCE would have been 10.9%, which is still below our target but somewhat higher than the reported number. And of this, about 1.1 billion relates to the Mkondo project. The majority of the spend in the first half of 2025 was in the paper division, and about 280 million of the 400 related to the Mkondo project. We expect to spend a further 185 million in the second half of 2025, which will bring total spend at the end of the year to approximately 1.17 billion rand. An additional 150 million is budgeted for environmental projects, which we anticipate will start in the second half of 2025, but will only be completed in the next 2 to 3 years. Based on current projections, we expect to spend between 900 million and 1 billion rand by the end of this year, of which 400 million relates to the Mkondo project. CapEx, however, will be closely monitored and evaluated based on trading conditions, and we do expect this number to start coming down in 2026. The board has declared an interim dividend of 30 cents per share, which is in line with the interim dividend declared in the first half of 2024, and it equates to a cover of just over 3 times headline earnings per share, which is our target. This reflects the importance of shareholder returns and our continued confidence in the future of our business. And we had a couple of questions this morning, and just to elaborate, so we do expect a recovery, especially in the plastics business, in the second half of the year. And we are also nearing the end of our CapEx cycle, therefore the dividend, which is in line with the prior period. I'm going to hand you back over to Bruce now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. Moving on now to the outlook. As things stand currently, there's no doubt that trading conditions, both locally and globally, are expected to remain challenging, with the affected corresponding impact on profitability for the group. Having said that, based on current projections, we don't expect to take any commercial downtime at our containerboard mills, both Felixton and Mkondo. Felixton's got quite a strong order book at the moment, and Mkondo, after its startup, we'll see how that goes, but we don't expect, because we've had quite a bit of downtime for the project anyway. But we still expect continued pressure on pricing in the containerboard and the cartonboard business, just because we are still seeing quite a lot of paper available globally, and we're having to really defend our position in all markets. Fortunately, from a Felixton perspective, we're able to do so very effectively and profitably. In cartonboard, it's going to be more challenging, so we do expect still a very tough period in the cartonboard business, where the margins still under pressure in containerboard, but perhaps not to the same extent as they will be in cartonboard. We are still expecting good growth in the fruit sector in the second half, which has been a strategic focus for our business, as you all are probably aware. Just to give you some example, the CGA is currently forecasting citrus exports will increase around 9% this year compared to last year, which is encouraging. I mean, they're expecting 180 million cartons to be exported, and we are nearing the end, or not, we're not at the end, but nearing the tail end of the season, which is a lot up on last year. And for the whole season, that is, as I said, over 9% up. And we expect this to be reflected to some extent in our sales by the year end in both our plastics crates business and our corrugated business. In terms of US tariffs, I should just make a comment on that regarding the effects on the business, direct effects, and specifically related to the citrus exports. So approximately less than 10%, but maybe 6 to 8% of South African citrus is exported directly to the US. And all of that more or less comes from the Western Cape. So the biggest impact will be on our producer customers in the Western Cape when it comes to the price they can achieve in this period, because some of that fruit's on the water already and now will face the 30% duty as far as we understand as it arrives there. So the pricing will be under pressure, but the packaging has already gone out. What happens beyond this year is still very much uncertain, because I think we could take for granted that our fruit producers in South Africa are, number one, very resilient, two, very innovative, and three, produce extremely good quality fruit when compared to anybody in the world. So I have no doubt they'll be able to place the fruit. It's just at what price they can get for that fruit and how that affects their own business and the alignment of their own business in that respect. It's quite important to note when one looks at these tariffs, and the first thing I looked at when the tariff announcement came out in April, when on the so-called Liberation Day, was the relative position of South Africa compared to our competing countries who also export fruit. And one of those, or the two that are most notable in this case, are Peru and Chile. And unfortunately, their tariff is set at 10%, while ours is at 30% now. So they do have an advantage in that respect, and we'll have to see how that plays out in the coming period. When it comes to secondary effects, there's a lot more uncertainty. But just to give you some anecdotal sort of stories, in our Eastern Cape operation in East London, we are located next to a large car manufacturer, and they were down for a month in July and August. And we didn't actually realize to what extent some of the component manufacturers in South Africa do export some of their components, for example, to the US, packaged in boxes made in South Africa. So it's hard to evaluate what the secondary effects will be in the medium to long term. In the short term and thereafter, I think our key is to remain agile and aware of what's going on around us and adapt accordingly. A lot of the stuff when it comes to the auto sector, I think that's got a lot to do with government to government talks. But when it comes to the fruit sector, I must say I have great confidence in our fruit producers and the various bodies like the CGA and others, and SARTI when it comes to grapes, to really find a way to open markets to see through this current headwind that we face. And I think the whole world is wrestling with it. I mean, and I think my point on relative position is important when evaluating the impact of tariffs. And I elaborated a bit on that because I saw already some of the questions came through that Molly showed me a minute ago. As I mentioned earlier, we do expect an improved full year result for the plastics business. And as I think Charles mentioned in one of the questions that came through, Molly's will talk about it just now. 2024 was anyway not a great year. So we do expect to be up even when compared to 2023. I can't give you the number, but and it's also, I suppose, quite dangerous to say too much. But we do expect a better performance than even 2023. So it should reflect some of the investments that we made. But Molly's will cover that question a bit later anyway, just for completeness. As I've already mentioned, the main production elements of the Mkhondo mill will be complete and on track to be completed during this quarter, following approximately 4 weeks of downtime at our Mkhondo mill for the project in this half. And just to remind you, I don't know, did you cover that, the 50-odd million that would relate to that? So with a 4 weeks downtime at Mkhondo, that takes the contribution down for that business by about 50-odd million because of that downtime in the period. So just bear that in mind in your forecasts. That will be non-recurring, but that's pretty typical of a project of this nature because we didn't produce in that period. And as I mentioned, the contribution for the project we should see in the years going forward. So notwithstanding the very disappointing, I must say, result from the first half, we are still confident that the work we're doing in the various sectors will pay off, and we will even see a bit of an uplift from where we are at the moment in the second half, notwithstanding the challenges. And we're encouraged by the competitiveness of the businesses that we've transformed, and there is still some work to do in some of those, which we are busy doing, but we believe that we can really work our way towards a really profitable and sustainable future, which should benefit all of our shareholders and the company. So with that, then I'd like to hand back to Marlies to maybe go through the questions, which Hannes and I will then do our best to answer. I'm just going to get my pen.
Thank you, Bruce and Hannes. There were 3 questions relating to the US tariffs and the impact it could have on Impact's business, but I think you've covered that sufficiently in your outlook statement. And then Charles Host from Bateleur Capital just wants you to expand on your guidance for the plastics business profitability in 2025 compared to 2024 and 2023.
Yeah.
Then just on other capital expenditure,
Can I answer that question quickly? So I did cover it now in the outlook, Charles. I hope that was enough. I mean, we do expect a reasonable increase on 2023 even, but obviously there's a lot of factors playing in that, but certainly in our own planning, that's what we anticipate.
Thank you. Amo Mkhatle from Stein Capital Management would like to know on capital expenditure, could you please provide a breakdown of the company's capital expenditure since 2022 to 2025 between maintenance and expansion capex?
Yeah, you want to go for it?
No, go for it.
So I don't have that offhand available, but just as a kind of rule of thumb, we generally look at kind of staying business capex is about 5% of turnover, just as a guide, if we can get that information.
Can you provide insight into how the capital expenditure, both maintenance and expansion, is being financed, and specifically what portion is funded through debt versus other resources?
So it's a combination. So the capex is funded by cash from operations, as you could see from the slide. So this year this half we had over 600 million of cash from operations coming in, which is partly used to fund the capex, but then also you will see we've made use of debt resources. So it's a combination of the two.
Thank you. With respect to the projects the company has invested in since 2022, have any of these investments begun to generate measurable value for the business? And if not, could you share when management expects these investments to begin translating into value?
Yeah, so I'd happily answer that question. So let's take as a starting point our Felixton containerboard mill in northern KwaZulu-Natal. We did an investment, we made an investment of just over 200 million, I can't remember the exact number, which was completed at the end of 2023. And that was to increase the production of recycled-based containerboard, particularly liner, and particularly a paper that's used for making shopper bags, home delivery shopper bags. And that has been a hugely successful project. We've managed to reach all the design capacities and throughputs. The quality specifications have exceeded our expectations. The costs are lower than what we had originally planned out of that project, and the production is at least in line, and in some grades much higher. And we've seen the demand coming through from that sector. You might see the general trend by consumers to convenient shopping has continued to grow. You see that in the numbers from major retailers where they're showing 50 and 60% increase in their own home delivery operations. And we're benefiting from that because not only do we collect the waste paper, but we make the paper that's used to make the bags, and we also make some of those bags that are used to make for those shopper bags. So that's been a hugely successful project in that context. But in terms of its global competitiveness, I think the last period has been a real test for Felixton in the context of, has it been able to make a really good sustainable profit, notwithstanding the global downturn? And I can say without hesitation, it's making very good margins in this current context, and it's fully sold for the time being. So I don't want to overemphasize that because that's market related. But at the end of the day, it's able to hold its own both in domestic and export markets. And I think that demonstrates that it's been a very successful project. Another project that I think is starting to show its great potential is what we've done in our plastic containers business, and more specifically Castleview. The profitability of that, it's really delivering nicely against its original forecasts. The only downside we had in the last period was a bottling business, but notwithstanding that, you'll see by the end of the year, I think we're going to show the growth that you would expect from a business of that nature. So I'm confident that that will come off in a very good way, and we are very encouraged by that. Where we've perhaps not seen all the benefits yet is in Wadeville. We did the restructuring for the FMCG Wadeville business to exit low value toll manufactured preforms. And in place of that, we have invested not a lot of money, but a reasonable amount to assist our customers in transitioning from glass to PET for their jars, and for which we also make the closures. And those transitions have taken longer for a number of reasons, mainly, our customers, in terms of their market transition, we haven't quite made the schedules that we originally intended. So we haven't seen the benefits of that come through yet, but we're confident that that will come through in the next period. So I think there are a number of examples of good returns coming through from those projects. And I think there's still a lot of upside, especially in the paper business, where we see the transition or the exit from this down cycle, however long it may take. I think we will see tremendous benefits from that.
Thank you. Rowan Gula from Cronax Research. When will the finance costs for the Makonda project become expensed?
So it will be a stage. So when we start capitalizing, which we anticipate to start at the end of September, so end of Q3 this year, as you capitalize and you reduce your capital work in progress, that portion will have to be then expensed. So from the end of September, end of the third quarter this year, we'll start. It won't be all of it, because it will be a staged capitalization.
There are no further questions. Thank you.
Good. There's not one that just popped up there. No. Right. Well, thank you very much. If there are no further questions, then thank you very much for listening, everybody. And thanks to the colleagues also for joining us, and Spoo, especially our chairman. It's his first results presentation as chairman, and I'm very encouraged to see him here in person. Thanks for that, Spoo. And also everybody else, thank you for joining the call. Have a good day.